Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of Wine Grants, unscripted chat about the Unfunded, the official podcast of the Unfunded List. I'm your host, Dave Moss of the Moss Family Foundation. With me this week is Russ Finkelstein. Say hello, Russ.
Hello, everyone.
Russ and I recently went on a Schusterman Foundation funded trip to Israel together. He serves on the evaluation committee for the Unfunded List. He's not a big drinker, so he's not actually drinking wine this week. We got him a very fancy microbrewed gourmet soda. They are not paying us, so we're not going to name which soda that is. But he is drinking it out of a wine glass, as you'll probably know in the picture. I am drinking the same Vino Verde from last week because I enjoyed it very much.
If there's someone who represents a high-end soda that would be interested in sponsoring this program in the future, would they reach out to you?
Yeah, anyone really interested in sponsoring anything, please get in touch. We do need that. Particularly, I think most folks who come into the booth are going to be wine drinkers, so any sort of distributor or anything, that would be great. I've got Russ's bio up here. He's done some very impressive work, and I will now, he's asked that I read that out loud. So Russ Finkelstein is the managing director of Clearly Next, a startup web service that helps people navigate their careers. He also serves as senior advisor to the Talent Philanthropy Project and the New Organizing Institute on Talent Development Issues. He currently serves or has served in similar roles at the Schusterman Foundation, Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, and the Point Foundation. He served as associate director of Idealist.org for 14 years, where he was on the founding team of the organization. There, he led a staff of 9 to develop revenue-generating programs that addressed information gaps related to working in the nonprofit sector, domestic and global volunteering, graduate education, and year of service programs. Russ holds an MPA from Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs and has a BA in Literature and Government from Connecticut College. Go Camels. Although probably people don't say go Camels because they don't have a football team, I assume.
Well, when you're rooting on the hockey team or the soccer team, you still want those camels to go.
Yes, you would. You'd like them. I imagine you went to a lot of hockey, and I bet their hockey team's probably pretty good. NESCAC.
Yes, the big thing is sailing, which brings out the crowds.
So, somewhat interesting and somewhat related to the unfunded list is that of all the colleges I applied to, Connecticut College is the only school that did not say yes to me. I was waitlisted at Connecticut College, and I was. We were talking earlier about how I tend to take things very personally, and I took that very personally. I told them exactly what they could do with their wait list, and then I went to Dickinson College, which, fine. It was I had a fine time there, but I think I would have had a fine time anywhere. It just goes to show that just because you're waitlisted or rejected from a school or you don't get a grant doesn't mean that you won't one day end up in a soundproof booth with Russ Finkelstein.
That is certainly something to strive for. When life hands you lemons, think about that as your potential future lemonade. I think it's definitely. I know, from the startup point of Idealist, we were rejected as an Echoing Green candidate.
Really?
We were. They didn't understand. They didn't fund us. We had a tough time. I think I may have shared with you, I'm not sure, that we actually went through an exercise once where we wrote several hundred foundations just to let them know that Idealist existed and was a service. In fact, in the first line of the note we sent out to these several hundred foundations, we said, we are not looking for funding. We're letting you know that we're a free service for your grantees. And we received several hundred notes, all of which said, we do not fund in your service area. So, we definitely, for us, it was both incredibly disappointing and also became a mechanism for us to think about how we could fund ourselves, which is one of the reasons why the job postings and the graduate school events that we have are such an important part of the model of keeping Idealist going. It's less of a grant model and more of a revenue model.
That's fascinating. Did you ever find any foundation funding for Idealist?
We never had. So in that initial batch, we got. I think there were 2 community foundations. I think one was Nebraska and the other was New Mexico. That said that they would let their grantees know about this free service. And then it took a couple more years. We got a small grant from. We got a series of small grants. They were very, very, very tiny grants. It was the revenue that
Micro
helped us
grants.
move forward. Yes. Yeah. No, it was very well. They also, part of it was, so this was in the early days of the internet, and you would get,
I remember.
yes, and you would hear from funders. They would be like, well, on the one hand, we don't necessarily want to be on the internet. We already get enough applications, so we don't see the value of being on the internet. We also don't know if this internet thing is going to take off. It seems to us that it's better for us. We were focused on, going across service area, going across geographic area, and they were like, we only fund in one specific space. It doesn't make sense to us. So I recall this one foundation which gave like $1 million to fund a website for Georgia children's organizations. And it was one of those things where the funders
$1 million,
$1 million, which was a lot.
I could make a great website.
And this was like 15, 20 years ago. So it was one of those things where they didn't. It was kind of on a cutting edge. They didn't understand what the thing was, and therefore they didn't fund it. So I think oftentimes foundations are extremely risk averse. There are relatively few that are willing to sort of go outside of a comfort zone. They appreciate either founders who've accomplished a lot previously, or they prior foundation support, which to them is a sign that, okay, well, this is worth funding because someone else has funded it.
Mm-hmm. Or they, oftentimes I think it is that they know the person.
Yeah.
And they may have not ever accomplished anything. They might be related to that person.
Right. Right.
Or they're related to somebody who knows them well.
Yeah. It could be very, very clubby.
Yes.
In that way, where it can be about access.
And honestly, I understand that when you're going to give money to somebody, you prefer that not be a stranger, somebody who you know and trust. I think I understand why funders feel that, but at the same time, not everybody can get into those circles and can get into those clubs, and some of those people who have really great ideas will not be able to do that.
Yeah, the ability to develop those relationships, I think, and not every person also. Even forget about getting into the club. Not everybody has the personality.
But even if you were to get into the club,
you're not necessarily going to make that kind of impression. It just makes it really difficult to be the kind of person. Oftentimes it takes sort of a big personality and a very sort of, there's a certain kind of traditional leadership style that people look for. And the truth is, not everybody has that, and the world would not be better off if everybody were that way.
Mm-hmm. I think that our recent trip to Israel was incredibly meaningful for me. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about since is we had a session where they talked about some of the various biblical leadership styles, in particular Moses. Moses was not really like the Charlton Heston Moses, the charismatic leader who was able to do everything. They refer to him in the Bible as being heavy-tongued, which most folks interpret to mean that he had a stutter.
Yeah.
He was not particularly well liked, but he had a vision. He knew where they were going, and he was going to get there. He needed Aaron and Joshua to help, convey that message, and also Miriam to help the camp keep happy. But as soon as Moses left the camp for a while, they went right back to doing what they were doing before and worshiping the golden calf. Mm-hmm. I think if there were foundations back then, and perhaps there were, some of these foundations have been around a while, I think Moses would have had a really hard time finding funding.
Yeah.
Where would then we'd be worshiping golden calves, and that's not. We do welcome people of all faiths to listen to this podcast. I don't mean to. If you are at home worshiping a golden calf this week, please don't be offended. I do respect your faith and your religion, for all I know, you've got it right.
I appreciate that disclaimer. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
But back then. I think if there were foundations, it would have been a lot of Aaron and Joshua would be able to get into the room and maybe sell them on that shiny golden calf. And some stuttering fellow who wanted to walk through the desert for a long time, that probably would have been harder to find funding.
Well, it's also actually the other thing that you're talking about is you're talking about 4 different types, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing is to have all of that, the capacity of doing all of those things simultaneously is difficult, and that's why I think very often people continue to fund what's been funded because they're risk averse and they're afraid of, like, at least that way nothing bad's going to happen. I think people very often work that way, and I think that it's also a reason why people fund founders so often of different. They're just like, they'll keep funding them for whatever they're going to do, and not everyone's second, third, fourth, fifth idea is worth
Mm.
is worth those kinds of resources, but because they've
Mm-hmm.
been, they've been in the quote unquote major leagues,
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to go out and continue getting those kinds of resources.
Mm-hmm. That's yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I have several follow-up questions to some of the stuff you were saying before. In particular, one of the focuses about the of the unfunded list is recognition for these ideas and for these folks that may not be able to get that recognition on their own
Yep.
through the normal process. But
Yeah.
another big part of it is to make sure that these folks get feedback on their proposals. When I was writing, it's been a while since I've submitted a grant, but when I was doing it, I think one of the most frustrating things for me was I was pretty sure I was a good fit.
Yeah.
I had scoured over that website. I really think I was using the right language and that I was going to be able to help advance their cause. And I got, really extremely standard boilerplate rejections, and sometimes no rejection at all. Just assumed that I wasn't funded because they announced their grantees and I wasn't on the list. I was also part of a process, a team that applied for Echo and Green. We got along pretty far in the process and didn't get funded. But I will say that they did give us pretty solid feedback. Some parts were contradictory, but at least they gave me the thoughts of the people who had rejected us, and I knew I was able to know what their thought process was. I'm wondering if you recall, what was it? What was their specific problem with that deal? Was it that they didn't think the internet was going to take off?
I
Or?
think some of it was that they didn't. I think they didn't know us. I think so. When it comes to getting funded, I think there's a couple of things that determine, when people are doing a review. When I talk to folks about it, I'll say that there are three things that I think folks think about. I think there's is there a void, first of all. Secondly, how are you going to sustain this thing long term? Like, once the funding runs out, how are you going to keep this thing going? Because
Mm-hmm.
many things are intended to go longer. And the third thing is, who the hell are you to do this? Like, why should you get the money? Why are you someone who I think is capable of making it happen? So I think those are often the three places that people start from. At that point, they didn't give us much in the way of like real feedback. I just
Mm.
don't think they just didn't get it. And to be fair, the internet was pretty young, and not everybody was going to get it. And that's so I think that but that's okay. I mean, there are plenty of. I think the other thing is a thing like that, which is going to choose from a very small number and a lot of applicants. I think that they can be very, very, very choosy and selective, and they're going to be careful about the risks that they're going to take. Also, there are many, most organizations are not getting funding from them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the truth is there are great things that happen, and just because one group or one institution it doesn't make sense to, doesn't mean that it's still not a great idea. I think the challenge is, I think for most people, it's also just making sure that you're checking in with other people, some program officers and some others, to ensure that this concept that you have, when we're thinking about is there a void, how are you going to keep it going, and then also, who are you to do it? What do we see in terms of the kinds of connections you've made, the kinds of skills that you have, that you're well positioned to lead this thing. And I think very often you have those kinds of challenges. I remember, one of the first funders uh, that funded us, um, there was a story shared with us from the program officer that her assistant said, "This is the first thing you funded that I actually understood what it does." So this is the first thing that it was like a thing that actually like mattered or resonated in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I think it's just it's hard to know. I think the relationship piece is a big thing. I think one of the things I keep hearing from a fellowship perspective is that you'll hear more and more that people don't fund the organization, they fund the founder or the staff person. That more and more people are kind of going through this process of, who's this person? Does
Mm-hmm.
this person seem like there's someone? And this is more from a fellowship perspective than it is from a funder perspective. But I think that we're all being viewed under the lens of, what have you done that shows that you're capable of leading a thing. There are so many pieces that go into this, and as you're saying, I think for the most part we're not getting really useful feedback to improve, to figure out what we can do better in terms of the concept, where we might need to do more research, or how we can prove ourselves to be stronger leaders.
Mm-hmm. And it is difficult to give feedback. A lot of fundraisers can be quite tenacious,
Mm-hmm.
and if you give them some feedback, then they'll start trying to argue with you on the feedback, and you've sort of opened this feedback loop that
Yeah.
can sometimes seem never ending. I remember when I was doing, what was one of the years I did the giving circle at the Slingshot Fund, someone came in, I forget who, it's a very accomplished philanthropist, came in to talk to give a session about how to say no, right?
Yeah.
How to say no to grantees, and I remember he compared it to making sure that you hand them a perfectly smooth ball,
Mm-hmm.
that there was nothing that they could grab to throw the ball back at you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you say, we don't think this program's sustainable, right? Then you can come back and say, but it is sustainable because we're going to do this, this, and this, and then you don't, most funders don't have, they just don't have the time to do that. While it may seem like their resources are limitless, they really aren't.
Right. But
Particularly time.
that's an interesting perspective, which says that when you're saying the perfectly smooth ball, the idea is I want to end this.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically saying I want to end
it to
this
be over with,
and not to necessarily have a transfer of useful information.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that smooth ball concept is fine, but it is saying that I've done my part and we're good.
It was very interesting to me that this session was not at all about how to explain to them why you were saying no. It was how to get them to stop bothering you.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, it's tough. You can't have, you're funding programs. You got to focus on the programs that you've decided to fund. You don't have an unlimited amount of time to go back and forth, with folks who aren't in your interest area, or who you really don't want to fund. And something, like I said, some of these people can be very tenacious, and they're going to be able to, however small of a hold you give on that there is on that ball, or whatever traction they can find, they're going to try to send it back. Because
have you seen any place where you didn't have a pre-existing relationship, where you didn't know them on some level, some personal level, the program officer, where you received any kind of real feedback?
So yeah, I mean, Echoing Green, I didn't know anybody there.
But Echoing Green is slightly different.
They're outside of the realm.
Yeah.
I think, no. Honestly, no. God, maybe. But if I did, it was very limited. Usually it'll be like, sometimes perfectly reasonable. We've shifted our priorities and we're now only working here.
Yep.
And we're no longer funding in this area.
Yep.
And that's just, that's
or we're on hiatus in general we're not funding for a year.
We
could have said that on the website, but we didn't.
We're having a granting freeze while we undergo a several year-long strategic planning process before we fire our president and then go back to how we were doing it before.
Right.
That's just a completely hypothetical situation,
right.
And not meant to be anyone in particular.
Yeah.
We at the Moss Foundation are currently in a granting freeze because of a strategic planning process, but I locked the strategic planning committee in a room weeks ago. They have not noticed that they're locked in that room, and that's how I'm able to get away with what I'm doing now.
And well, I hear the interim there is a bit of a bozo, so I think good luck resolving that in a good way.
Yes,
but it's an interesting proposition in some ways. That idea of, can you imagine a world where foundations had someone on staff who, aside from the administration of the paperwork associated with that actually had the responsibility of giving notes, of giving feedback, because in some ways, I mean, I guess it's it's this idea of is the concept that it's worth, or at least let's say, who works to incubate, who works to say, what, there's a certain percentage of stuff, maybe there's going to be stuff that's just going to be no good, but maybe there's a concept or an individual where you see promise, and you take them under their wing in some way, and you say, okay, let's spend a little bit of time on perhaps helping this person develop or helping this concept be realized.
I think it could be very useful, and I think, in fact, it could be quite helpful to the foundations in terms of getting folks off their plate. Because if you send off a proposal that you spent a lot of time on and you thought was very good and was very tailored to the specific needs of that foundation, and you get no feedback on it, you're going to send them a very similar proposal next year and hope that it gets in there. You have no way of knowing how you need to change it.
Yeah.
What you wrote was what you thought was the best fit. And I think lots of particularly foundations with open processes that get tens of thousands of applicants every year, might very well might be doing very. It seems counterintuitive sometimes in some ways, but to actually spend time with those folks, it may get them better proposals next year,
Right.
or convince some folks. They might actually convince some folks that that going there is not a good idea. I mean, for me, there were lots of places where I'm still pretty sure some of the programs that I was applying for are a good fit there, but I stopped applying because, that you're getting nothing. No one's responding to your emails or calls or anything. There's more than one way to communicate that you're not interested.
Right.
I've learned that in my social life.
Mm-hmm.
as well, and as well as with my foundation proposals.
Have you received more rejection in your social life or in your desire to get funding?
I think in terms of boilerplate rejection letters,
yes,
it's pretty much an even pile if we were to compare the two of them. And on that, I think that's a great note to end. Russ, I want to thank you very much for coming by and recording with us. I hope you've enjoyed your fancy gourmet soda.
I look forward to the podcast future being funded by.
Yes. Absolutely. And I want to, as always, thank our hosts, the Lookout in DC. The Lookout is a co-working space, a community of filmmakers and creative folks, and they allow me to be here and do my nonsense. Thank you very much to the 10 or so of you who are listening. Hi, Mom.
Oh, I'd say hi to my mom as well, who will likely listen to.
All right, great. So 13 listeners this week.
That's right. A high Jewish percentage as well.
Thank you, everybody, and good luck with your funding.